Hello, BIC people, this is Undefeatable Twilight once again. I will get a better microphone soon, I promise, but for now I hope you'll bear with this crappy built-in one that I've got in my laptop. Hopefully you can still hear me fine. I'm going to start this new series now that might die out straight away after I finish this video, or it might carry on, depending on how well people like it and how much free time I get to do other episodes. But this is going to be called Twilight Storytime. Basically, I'm going to read to you. So, this is the book I'm doing. You can't see the title, but it's The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. This is the whole trilogy here, so don't worry, it's not just one book. This is all 5 in this. It's one of my favourite books, so I thought I'd share it with you guys. And I'm not the best storyteller in the world, but I hope you enjoy it anyway. I'm actually going to start off with the foreword by Douglas Adams, because I think it's quite entertaining. So, here we go. And depending on how much time is left in the video, I'll go into the first chapter straight away, or I'll do that in the next video. So, a guide to the guide, some unhelpful remarks from the author. The history of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is now so complicated that every time I tell it, I contradict myself, and whenever I do get it right, I'm misquoted. So the publication of this omnibus edition seemed like a good opportunity to set the record straight, or at least firmly crooked. Anything that is put down wrong here is, as far as I'm concerned, wrong for good. The idea for the title first cropped up when I was lying drunk in a field in Innsbruck, Austria in 1971. Not particularly drunk, just the sort of drunk you get when you have a couple of stiff gosses after not having eaten for 2 days straight on account of being a penniless hitchhiker. We are talking of a mild inability to stand up. I was travelling with a copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to Europe by Ken Walsh, a very battered copy that I had borrowed from someone. In fact, since this was 1971 and I still have the book, it must count as stolen by now. I don't have a copy of Europe on $5 a day as it was then, because I wasn't in that financial league. Night was beginning to fall on my field as it spun lazily underneath me. I was wondering where I could go that was cheaper than Innsbruck, revolved less, and didn't do the sort of things to me that Innsbruck had done to me that afternoon. What had happened was this. I had been walking through the town trying to find a particular address, and being thoroughly lost, I stopped to ask for directions from a man in the street. I knew this mightn't be easy because I don't speak German, but I was surprised to discover just how much difficulty I was having communicating with this particular man. Gradually, the truth dawned on me as we struggled in vain to understand each other that of all the people in Innsbruck I could have stopped to ask, the one I had picked did not speak English, did not speak French, and was also deaf and dumb. With a series of sincerely apologetic hand movements, I disentangled myself, and a few minutes later, on another street, I stopped and asked another man who also turned out to be deaf and dumb, which was when I bought the beers. I ventured back onto the street. I tried again. When the third man I spoke to turned out to be deaf and dumb and also blind, I began to feel a terrible weight settling on my shoulders. Wherever I looked, the trees and buildings took on dark and menacing aspects. I pulled my coat tightly around me and hurried, lurching down the street, whipped by a sudden gust of wind. I bumped into someone and stammered an apology, but he was deaf and dumb and unable to understand me. The sky roared. The pavement seemed to tip and spin. If I hadn't happened then to duck down a side street and pass a hotel where a convention for the deaf and dumb was being held, there is every chance that my mind would have cracked completely and I would have spent the rest of my life writing the sorts of books which Kafka became famous for and dribbling. As it is, I went to lie in a field, along with my Hitchhiker's Guide to Europe, and when the stars came out, it occurred to me that if only someone writes a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy as well, then I, for one, would be off like a shot. Having had this thought, I probably fell asleep and forgot about it for 6 years. I went to Cambridge University. I took a number of baths and a degree in English. I worried a lot about girls and what happened to my bike. Later I became a writer and worked on a lot of things that were almost incredibly successful, but in fact just failed to see the light of day. Other writers will know what I mean. My pet project was to write something that would combine comedy and science fiction, and it was this obsession that drove me into deep debt and despair. No one was interested except finally one man, a BBC radio producer named Simon Brett, who had the same idea, comedy and science fiction. Although Simon only produced the first episode before leaving the BBC to concentrate on his own writing, he is the author of the Charles Paris detective novels. I owe him an immense debt of gratitude for simply getting the thing to happen in the first place. He was succeeded by the legendary Jeffrey. In its original form, the show was going to be rather different. I was feeling a little disgruntled with the world at the time and had put together about 6 different plots, each of which ended with the destruction of the world in a different way and for a different reason. It was to be called The Ends of the Earth. While I was filling in the details of the first plot, in which the Earth was demolished to make way for a new hyperspace express route, I realised that I needed to have someone from a different planet around to tell the reader what was going on, to give the story the context it needed. So I had to work out who he was and what he was doing on the Earth. I decided to call him Ford Prefect. This was a joke that missed American audiences entirely, of course, since they had never heard of the rather oddly named car, and many thought it was a typing error for perfect. I explained in the text that the minimal research my alien character had done before arriving on this planet had led him to think that this name would be nicely inconspicuous. He had simply mistaken the dominant life form. So how would such a mistake arise? I remembered when I used to hitchhike through Europe and would often find the information or advice that came my way was out of date or misleading in some way. Most of it, of course, just came from stories of other people's travel experiences. At that point, the title Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy suddenly popped back into my mind from wherever it had been hiding all this time. Ford, I decided, would be a researcher who collected data for the guide. As soon as I started to develop this particular notion, it moved inexorably to the centre of the story, and the rest, as the creator of the original Ford Prefect would say, is bunk. The story grew in the most convoluted way, as many people will be surprised to learn. Writing episodically meant that when I finished one episode, I had no idea about what the next one would contain. When, in the twists and turns of the plot, some events suddenly seemed to illuminate things that had gone before, I was as surprised as anyone else. I think that the BBC's attitude towards the show while it was in production was very similar to that which Macbeth had towards murdering people. Initial doubts, followed by cautious enthusiasm, and then greater and greater alarm at the sheer scale of the undertaking and still no end in sight. Reports that Jeffrey and I and the sound engineers were buried in a subterranean studio for weeks on end, taking as long to produce a single sound effect as other people took to produce an entire series, and stealing everybody else's studio time in which to do so, were all vigorously denied and absolutely true. The budget of the series escalated to a point that it could have practically paid for a few seconds of Dallas, if the show hadn't worked. The first episode went out on BBC Radio 4 at 10:30 p.m. on Wednesday, 8th of March 1978, in a huge blaze with no publicity at all. Bats heard it. The occasional dog barked. After a couple of weeks, a letter or two trickled in, so some out there had listened. People I talked to seemed to like Marvin the paranoid android, whom I had written in as a one-scene joke and had only developed further at Jeffrey's insistence. Then some publishers became interested, and I was commissioned by Pan Books to write up the series in book form. After a lot of procrastination and hiding and inventing excuses and having baths, I managed to get about 2/3 of it done. At this point, they said, very pleasantly and politely, that I had already passed 10 deadlines, so would I please just finish the page I was on and let them have the damn thing. Meanwhile, I was busy trying to write another series, and was also writing and script editing Doctor Who, because while it was all very pleasant to have your own radio series, especially one that somebody had written in to say that they heard, it didn't exactly buy you lunch. So that was more or less the situation when the book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, was published in September 1979, and appeared on the Sunday Times bestseller list at #1 and just stayed there. Clearly somebody had been listening. This is where things start getting complicated, and this is what I was asked in writing this introduction to explain. The guide has appeared in so many forms: books, radio, a television series, records, and soon to be a major motion picture. Each time with a different storyline that even its most acute followers have become baffled at times. Here then is a breakdown of the different versions, not including the various stage versions, which only complicate the matter even further. The radio series began in March 1978. The first series consisted of 6 programs, or FITs as they were called. FITs 1 to 6. Easy. Later that year, one more episode was recorded and broadcast, commonly known as the Christmas episode. It contained no reference of any kind to Christmas. It was called the Christmas episode because it was first broadcast on 24th of December, which is not Christmas Day. After this, things began to get increasingly complicated. In the autumn of 1979, the first Hitchhiker book was published, called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It was a substantially expanded version of the first 4 episodes of the radio series, in which some of the characters behaved in entirely different ways, and others behaved in exactly the same ways, but for entirely different reasons, which amounts to the same thing, but saves rewriting the dialogue. At roughly the same time, the double record album was released, which was, by contrast, a slightly contracted version of the first 4 episodes of the radio series. These were not the recordings that were originally broadcast, but wholly new recordings of substantially the same scripts. This was done because we had used music off gramophone records as incidental music for the series, which is fine on radio but makes commercial release impossible. In January 1980, 5 new episodes of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy were broadcast all in 1 week, bringing the total number to 12 episodes. In the autumn of 1980, the second Hitchhiker book was published in Britain around the same time that Harmony Books published the first book in the United States. It was a very substantially reworked, re-edited and contracted version of episodes 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 5 and 6, in that order, of the radio series The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. In case that seemed too straightforward, the book was called The Restaurant at the End of the Universe because it included the material from radio episode 5 of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which was set in a restaurant called Milliways, otherwise known as The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. At roughly the same time, a second record album was made featuring a heavily rewritten and expanded version of episodes 5 and 6 of the radio series. This record album was also called The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. Meanwhile, a series of 6 television episodes of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was made by the BBC and broadcast in January 1981. This was based, more or less, on the first 6 episodes of the radio series. In other words, it incorporated most of the book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and the second half of the book, The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. Therefore, though it followed the basic structure of the radio series, it incorporated revisions from the books, which didn't. In January 1982, Harmony Books published The Restaurant at the End of the Universe in the United States. In the summer of 1982, a third Hitchhiker book was published simultaneously in Britain and the United States, called Life, the Universe and Everything. This was not based on anything that had already been heard or seen on radio and television. In fact, it flatly contradicted episodes 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12 of the radio series. These episodes of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you will remember, had already been incorporated in revised form in the book called The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. At this point, I went to America to write a film screenplay which was completely inconsistent with most of what had gone on so far, and since that film was then delayed in the making, a rumour currently has it that filming will start shortly before the last round. I wrote 1/4 and last book in the trilogy, So Long and Thanks for All the Fish. This was published in Britain and in the USA in the autumn of 1984, and it effectively contradicted everything to date, up to and including itself. People often ask me how under these circumstances they can best leave the planet, so I have prepared some brief notes. How to leave the planet. 1. Phone NASA. Their phone number is 731-483-3111. Explain that it's very important that you get away as soon as possible. 2. If they do not cooperate, phone any friend you may have in the White House, 202-4656-1414, to have a word on your behalf with the guys at NASA. If you don't have any friends at the White House, phone the Kremlin and ask the overseas operator for 0107-095-295-9051. They don't have any friends there either, at least none to speak of, but they do seem to have a little influence, so you may as well try. If that also fails, phone the Pope for guidance. His telephone number is 011-396-6982, and I gather his switchboard is infallible. If all these attempts fail, flag down the passing flying saucer and explain that it's vitally important you get away before your phone bill arrives. Douglas Adams, Los Angeles, 1983, and London, 1985. Alright, it's been 13 minutes and I'm exhausted, so I'm going to stop this. Next time we'll do the first chapter, the prologue and the first chapter of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So look forward to it. I'll see you next time. Love and peace.